Tony, now, Huthwaite's done a lot of work around negotiation tactics and behaviors.
Sure.
And what makes your research unique is that it's field research.
Yeah.
It's negotiation in action. And that's quite rare. As far as I know, it hasn't been done anywhere else yet. But what have you learned from all of that? What does your research say about the kinds of things that successful negotiators do that average negotiators don't?
The major differences were really around the behavioural skills of skilled negotiators, in that they have a behavioural flexibility. The way they speak to people is flexible. They plan how they want to speak to people. They plan the intonation, shall we say, of the negotiation. There's so much work goes into that. And when we were looking at the research, the biggest differences we found were in those behavioural skills that people use, and certain behaviours being used more than other behaviours.
Okay. Any particular behaviours that stand out?
Certainly, yes. Skilled negotiators tend to ask 5 times as many questions as average negotiators. But it isn't, of course, just about, can you ask a question? It's about what's the question targeted at. So what we find is they seek motivations of the other side. They seek reasons from the other side for doing something. They even seek the other side's feelings to get a feeling for themselves of the temperature of the negotiation and whether or not things are on the right track. So that's one.
Yeah.
They actually give feelings, and I don't mean by this that they start crying on people's shoulders.
Not the Kleenex moment.
Yes,
Yeah.
But if you think about, if you're saying something that you like, dislike, agree with, whatever that might be, happy with, unhappy with, what you're not doing is giving information about the facts and figures. You're only giving it internally, and it's pretty hard for anybody to argue with the way that you feel.
Indeed.
So that's one, and they do a lot of clarification, so a lot of testing to make sure their understanding is correct of what the other person said, and vice versa, testing to make sure the other side has understood what they've said, and summarising. So a lot around clarity. And one of the ones that was unusual for us, that what we found was a thing called behaviour labelling.
Yeah.
So actually signposting the behaviour you're going to use next. So let me ask you a question, let me tell you something, let me do this. And when we looked into
play devil's advocate or something.
They might label that that's what they're going to do, but I think that's probably so that people don't pick up the wrong reason for the next behaviour. But the labelling bit tends to formalise a conversation. So if you think, if I say to you, let me ask you a question, what you're actually waiting for now should be a question. And if you're in a group, everybody's waiting for that question. So it formalises it. And in some ways allows you to get into a conversation as well if the conversation is quite volatile.
Now, I get that asking a lot of questions is important to get information, but people might get tired of all your questioning. So how would you deal with the situation if I really have some good questions that I want to ask you, and you say to me, listen, stop asking these questions, let's just get down to business now?
Yeah, well, it's questioning, not interrogation. And sometimes if you're trying to teach people behavioural skills, there is always going to be an over practice of something, so it feels like people are practicing too much. But you'd be very surprised how many people hardly ask any questions whatsoever. So in many cases, just doubling the amount of questions that you ask is probably not going to feel intrusive. If it does start to feel intrusive, then you need to change that category, and of course spread the questions out over the negotiation.
I find the expressing your feelings part quite interesting, because when I talk to people about your results and so on, and I mention that, they say, but hang on, you shouldn't do this. It might be a weakness. Showing your feelings, expressing your feelings. What would be your response to that?
Well, I could give you the interpretation of it, but the exact research says that 12% of everything that somebody does is expressing their internal feelings. And the view of that interpretation is that, as I said before, it means you're not talking about your own facts and figures. But more importantly, if you see it as a sort of an iceberg, a behavioural iceberg, what most people are pretty good at doing is the top bit of the iceberg, which is the giving information, they're asking for things, etc. But once you get underneath that and start to give information about your feelings, your perceptions, etc., it tends to build more trust. So you tend to trust people more when you're not just working on hard facts and figures. But you're not really giving anything away with that.
All right. What about anger in negotiation? To what extent do successful negotiators use anger as a tool? And how often do they do that? Or do they do it deliberately as a tactic?
Yeah, as a deliberate tool. I don't think they use it a lot. I think there is a change in tone, and if you do usually see somebody using anger, and we wouldn't have anger as a behaviour, the behaviour, it would be exhibited through something like an attack to somebody or being very defensive, and then it's a very emotional exchange. When you do see that happen, that maybe an attack, it usually very quickly is followed by something which is positive to move it on to somewhere else. So it's an expression of feeling, obviously, and it's quite a strong expression of feeling. But if that spirals, then it tends to spiral out of control, particularly if the other person responds.